I feel like the Hulk every time I do this. It's wrap up time. Welcome back, my sweet angel perfect besties. We're here with another wrap up. Surprise, surprise, I bet that is shocking news. And I'm just very excited and happy to be here. So let's talk stats quickly. As per usual, I'll try and have all of the timestamps linked down below as well, for those of you who might want to skip over any specific books or stats or whatever you might want. But let's see what we have here. Okay, in total I read 16 books. We had a kind of unique TBR for October. I had 11 books on it because I picked 10 prompts out of my TBR jar, and then I also had my book club book of the month, so I had 11 books total. I read 7 of them, and I tried reading another 2 that I DNF'd, and so there were only 2 books from that TBR that I didn't touch at all, and that was Red Rising and Say You Swear, but both of those are on my TBR for November, so fingers crossed we get to them in November instead. Out of the 16 books that I read, 9 were part of series and 7 were standalones, which honestly usually my series is way higher than my standalones, but it's almost even this month, which is really interesting. And then for a genre breakdown, we had 5 fantasy, 1 general fiction, 1 sci-fi, 1 non-fiction, 3 mystery/thrillers, and 5 romance books. A bit of a range this month. And finally, 2 out of the 16 books I read this month were rereads. So let's start with talking about those quickly. The rereads that I did this month were Heir of Fire and Queen of Shadows. I've been doing my reread of the Throne of Glass series over the past few months, and these are the 2 that I got to this month. I love these books so much. I feel like this is when the series really starts to gain a lot of momentum. Heir of Fire, I feel like, is when the trajectory of the entire series really just starts speeding up. You get introductions to some new characters, you get some new POVs, and things really just start happening. And then when you get to Queen of Shadows, this is definitely one of my favorite books in the series, and this whole reread, I was just having the best time ever. Both of these are 5 stars for me, by the way. This book specifically, I feel like it's really where you see a lot of the friendships really develop. You see that found family just shine through, and that is one of my favorite things about probably all of Sarah J Maas's books, is just the found family and the friendships that she creates. And to me, this is the book where you really start to see that in this series specifically. So Queen of Shadows is very close to my heart. Absolutely adore this series, these books, these characters. I love them. The first book that I actually picked up this month was Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. And I'm not gonna lie, while I was reading this and the next book that I read, I was definitely feeling quite slumpy. I just really wasn't looking forward to picking up books as much as I normally do. And I don't think it was this book, but I do think this book may have suffered a little bit because of that. I think it was just after finishing Ballad of Never After in September, it was, my brain was so consumed by Ballad of Never After that it just felt like reading anything else just didn't really seem that good to me. However, even with those slumpy feelings, this book was still a 4 or a 4.25 star read for me. It was so good. It is the first book in a series, and it does feel like the first book in a series in terms of a lot of introductions, a lot of explaining relationship and who's who, the politics, all of that sort of stuff. It does feel like a lot of setup, but that's understandable as the first book in a brand new fantasy series. Also, this book is totally unattached to any of the other Shadowhunters books that Cassandra Clare has written. So if you are feeling just overwhelmed by the Shadowhunters universe, you don't know where to start, you don't know if you want to get into a 15 book series, first of all, fair enough. Second of all, start with this. Why not? All new characters, whole new world, whole new magic system, and right now there's only 1 book. But overall, I really enjoyed this. We're following the Swordcatcher, who is basically a child who is taken from an orphanage to be raised with the prince and to be the bodyguard for that prince, and doesn't really have a lot of autonomy because he just exists to look after the prince. But also, Kel, who is a Swordcatcher, was destined for a pretty lousy life because he was an orphan. He wouldn't have been able to provide much of a life for himself, so him being taken as a Swordcatcher is kind of a step up for him, and he's really thankful for that, and he's become pretty much best friends with the prince. And then the other POV is Lynn, and she is a physician, kind of a doctor in the village, and she is part of a community that has been ostracized from society because of their rare magical abilities, and the kingdom just does not like the idea of magic or magical abilities. So you're following these 2 POVs from very different people in 2 very different parts of the kingdom, and you see their stories overlap basically through the ragpicker king, who is like the criminal underworld king, which is just like a really fascinating situation. I'm just gonna leave it there. I feel like that's like a good enough introduction for you. I think if that interests you, definitely pick up this book. It is long, but it's really, really good. The next book that I picked up was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. This was my little friend group's book club pick, and we all absolutely love this. This was 5 stars for me. At first I was like, oh, maybe like 4.5, but I've definitely continued to think about it since finishing it. Even after like breaking it down and like thinking over the book more and more, it just has gotten like better in my head, and I just keep thinking like, wow, I can't believe these characters aren't real and this situation isn't real, because it felt so real whilst reading. I don't even know how to explain this book, because it's very like the description of it is just like not good compared to you actually reading it, and like when you pick it up you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I totally understand, because it's like about video games and friendship and like careers and love and lots of things that just don't sound as good compared to the actual reading experience. So I really encourage you, if you haven't picked this book up, I know a lot of people have, it has a lot of awards, it's very famous, but if you haven't picked this book up, please do, because as someone who does not read much general fiction at all, this was absolutely amazing. I adored the writing, I adored the characters. They were messy, but they were real, and I think that's why they felt so real, because they had flaws to them. Probably one of my favorites of the year, I think. Then I picked up Hopeless by Elsie Silver. I'm kind of nervous to talk about this because I gave this 3.5 stars, which is not a bad rating, but it wasn't as high as I expected it to be. This is the 5th book in the Chestnut Springs series by Elsie Silver, which is like a cowboy kind of romance, kind of gives small town vibes. I know it's not technically a small town, but it gives those vibes. And in this story, we're following Beau. And Beau's story has been hinted at and kind of like built up over the past 4 books. Like, we have all been waiting for Beau's book, and a lot of us, I think, were just like, this is going to be our favorite, like it's going to be the best one, and it has been for a lot of people. I've seen incredible ratings for this book. I've seen so many people give it like 4.5 to 5 stars. Like, a lot of people just really, really love it. For me, it didn't quite hit, and I'm really sad about that, because obviously I was really excited about it. I think for me, I was expecting Beau's story to be really emotional, because in the previous 4 books we see Beau go through a really traumatic event, and it's hinted at, but obviously because we're not reading from Beau's POV in those other 4 books, we don't actually get to see what's going on in his head. And the female main character that we're following is from a really difficult family, has just had a really awful upbringing, and just, I don't know, just like has fought tooth and nail to get to where she is now. And so I was just expecting this book to be extremely emotional, really beautiful, and just like healing. And I just personally feel like it wasn't that. I know that there were parts of this story that felt like that, but I think I just expected a really like raw and emotional book, and I was given a really like physical and like lusty book, and that just left me a little disappointed. I think I was expecting this book to be a lot more like Powerless, like Jasper's story, because Jasper had a lot of trauma, and that was a really emotional book, and that was my favorite out of the series, and I just feel like we didn't get that in this book. And obviously it might just be my fault for having wrong expectations, and it's really hard going into a book when you have high expectations, because obviously there's a huge chance you can be let down. And like I said, so many people love this book, so it's not like it's a bad book. I just think I didn't get what I wanted out of it. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, I definitely really enjoyed parts of it, but it was too physical for me. I love like a deep emotional romance, and this just didn't give that to me personally. That's just my own feelings, and obviously, like I said, a lot of people disagree with me. A lot of people love this book. I would say, now that I've finished the series, my order of how I would personally like rank the series, I would say Powerless is in 1st spot, Reckless in 2nd, Flawless in 3rd, Hopeless in 4th, and then Heartless in 5th. But I also know that Heartless is a lot of people's favorite, which is kind of fun, because it means we all just like relate to different characters and like connect with different stories. So obviously disappointing for me, but I'm glad a lot of people out there have loved it. After finishing the Natural series by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, I feel like I've been on a bit of like a YA mystery / YA thriller kick. I really love YA mysteries and thrillers. I think they're really fun, they're fast paced. I just always have a great time when I read them, and so I've kind of just been looking for anything that will make me feel the same as the Naturals. And so because of that, I picked up None Shall Sleep and the sequel Some Shall Break, obviously both by Ellie Marnie. I heard about these from Destiny, Destiny. I've had the first book on my radar for a long time, and then I heard Destiny kind of compare it to The Naturals because it's about teenagers who work with the FBI to solve cold cases, which is a really similar premise to The Naturals. And I didn't realize that's what the premise was. Like, I'd always seen the cover and it always looked really intriguing to me, but I didn't know that it was like a YA thriller with like FBI elements. So after hearing that, thank you, Bestie Destiny, I picked both of these up and I devoured them in a few days each. They were really, really good. I would definitely recommend them. I rated the first one 3.5 and the second one 4. Honestly, on reflection, I'd probably even bump this one up to like maybe a 3.75 or something. Like, they're both quite good. I don't think they're quite as good as the Natural series in my opinion, but if you're looking for something with like a similar-ish vibe, I would definitely recommend both of these books. And also just like gorgeous covers, gorgeous spines. Like, why are these covers so cute, even though they're literally terrifying thrillers about serial killers and creepy things like that? Definitely kept me on the edge of my seat, and I would 10 out of 10 recommend. Then I picked up More Than Words by Mia Sheridan. As a lot of you probably know, I'm obsessed with Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan, one of my faves, and I've read a bunch of Mia Sheridan books now. I think this one might be like my 5th one by her. None of the other ones that I've read have quite lived up to Archer's Voice, but I've enjoyed all of them. This one was like a 3.5/3.75. I've actually thought about it quite a bit since finishing it, which is really interesting for a book that I rated like 3.5 stars, so maybe I will bump it up to like 3.75. But in this book, we follow two people who meet as kids. They spend a lot of time just like being besties when they're kids, a couple of years I think, and then suddenly they just like never see each other again. And then we jump forward into the present tense where they happen to bump into each other again. They actually bump into each other a few times before they really like actually reconnect, and it is definitely quite unrealistic the ways that they run into each other. I'm just like, that would just not happen, especially multiple times, because they run into each other like in Paris, even though they're both from the US. And I'm just like, what are the chances that you're running into each other in multiple different parts of France at different times? Like, anyway, it's okay. If you can get past that, which honestly I did, it's a really cute story. It's just like the classic two kind of traumatized people finding healing and like reconnecting years later. I also really love the ending of this one. I just feel like it was super sweet. So if you're just looking for a more deep emotional romance, I definitely recommend honestly all of Mia Sheridan's books. I feel like she always writes quite an emotional romance, but this has been on my TBR for a really long time, so I'm glad that I finally read it, and I honestly really enjoyed it. Next up, I read Archenemies, which is the second book in the Renegades trilogy by Marissa Meyer, and this was so freaking good. I rated the first book 5 stars and I rated this one 4.5. Like, I just had so much fun. I feel like these books are just like fast paced and fun. There's a bit of romance, a bit of mystery, secret identities. I feel like I've talked about this book and the first book like quite a lot, so I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but if you haven't picked up this series, I really recommend it. It's young adult sci-fi, which honestly kind of put me off when I heard about it because I was like, oh, sci-fi, I don't know if that's for me. But as someone who does not read sci-fi, like, I love this series and cannot recommend it enough. It's really easy to understand, not intimidating at all. And this is one of those books where I feel like I've read 10 pages, but I've actually read 50. Like, it just goes by so fast. I can't wait to pick up the third book in the trilogy, hopefully in November. That's the plan at least. But yeah, if you just want something fun, fairly lighthearted, but still has like depth to it, I'd recommend the series. And I definitely need to read more from Marissa Meyer as well. I'm planning on reading the Lunar Chronicles after this. Then I read Foxglove by Adeline Grace. This is the sequel to Belladonna, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be a trilogy, so there's going to be one more book I think next year coming out in this little series. But this is a young adult gothic fantasy series. So in the first book we meet Signa, and she feels like she is cursed because everyone around her keeps dying, no matter where she goes, no matter who she lives with. She's lived with multiple different family members and all of them keep dying. It just feels like everyone around her just dies. And so when she is sent to go live with another family member, she is like, okay, I am determined to not let these ones die. Like, I am going to figure this out and make sure this doesn't happen again. And then someone else dies. And so she's basically like, I need to figure out who is doing this because I just can't allow this to happen again. So you basically follow her around as she's trying to solve this murder mystery, but it is just like very atmospheric, very vibey. It's set in this like old manor, very like creepy old house vibes. And I just really enjoyed the first one. So going into this one, I was like, I really don't know like what is gonna happen, because there's also a romance in the first book that felt quite developed. So I was just like, what are they gonna do in this book? It turns out they're gonna do another murder mystery, which honestly, even though it sounds like it's repetitive, it's really not, because it's like a bunch of new characters, a bunch of new things going on. In the first book, you meet Death, who is a person, like a being, I guess. I don't know if it's technically a person. And then in the second book, you meet his brother, which is just like, it's just a really interesting concept. I think Adeline Grace is really creative and just like comes up with very unique concepts. And I just, like, I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with this. I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much as the first one, but I am really intrigued to continue the series and see how the third book goes, especially because it feels like it's going to definitely really focus on a different character, like not Signa. And I really want to know how that's going to go. And I'm assuming there's going to be like a new romance in the third one, and that sounds really good. So very vibey, very atmospheric, probably perfect for this time of year when you want that kind of vibe. I wouldn't say these books are very fast paced. They're a bit slower. So if you don't like a slow paced book, I wouldn't recommend them because they are just like, they're just kind of there for the vibes. It's still like a murder mystery. So there's things going on, but it's not like there's something happening every scene. And I feel like this series is kind of hit and miss. Some people love it, some people don't. So I can see why. But yeah, I did enjoy it. I gave it 3.75, so I still do recommend it. Next up, we have A Curse for True Love. I feel like this is probably going to be in many people's October wrap up because I feel like everyone was looking forward to this, and I personally really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars. I've seen very mixed reviews. A lot of people did not give this 5 stars. A lot of people seemed pretty disappointed by it. Like, after reading all the reviews and the critiques, I honestly am like, yeah, good point. Like, there's a lot of things that I'm like, actually, now that you mention it, that is a really valid point that I didn't think about whilst I was reading. There were some critiques that I had while reading. If you want to see my actual like reactions and my thoughts while reading, I'll link the reading vlog down below because I vlogged the whole thing. But even though I do think there are critiques to this book and I do understand what everyone else is saying, I still just had a really great time while reading it. Like, when you watch the reading vlog of me reading it, I was just having such a fantastic time and I was so consumed by the story. I was so like in it. It felt like I was really just like living in this beautiful fantasy fairy tale world, and the writing is so beautiful. I love the characters. Yes, I do wish we saw more of certain characters, and yes, I do wish we got some answers to some plot lines that we really did not get answers to. But even after reading all of the critiques and all of the like not so good reviews, I still stand by my 5-star rating. I really do, because I really had a great reading experience. However, I don't think it's a 6-star read for me. I think Ballad of Never After is a 6-star read for me, and I honestly think that if I reread Once Upon a Broken Heart, it might be bumped up to a 5-star because it's like a 4.25 for me. And like I said, I do think this is a 5-star read for me, but I do think Ballad of Never After is just like a level higher. Like, it's just so good. And again, I still have not stopped thinking about Ballad of Never After even after reading this. Like, I feel like Ballad of Never After is still the one that's like really taking up the most of my brain space. But I did still really love this one. I really did. And I would be honest if I didn't. I would tell you guys, because like I said, I think all of the reviews that I've seen and all the comments are really valid, and I can totally understand why this isn't a 5-star read for some people and why it's been disappointing for some people. But I loved it. I really did. I also read Forget Me Not by Julie Soto, and this was good. I think I'd give it like 3.5 stars. Like, good. I'd recommend it. There were parts of it that I really enjoyed, but overall, it's probably not one of those books that I'm gonna really think that much about in the future or at all. In this book, we follow a wedding planner and a florist. It's like a second chance romance, so they had history, they did date for a while, and now they've been broken up for like, I think like 2 years, and they are now having to work on the same wedding together, so like a forced proximity situation. And that premise was really interesting to me. And like I said, I did like parts of this book. I think for me, the romance that we did get, especially like the flashbacks to like when they were dating, it was very like physical. And I think I just expected a lot more emotion in it. And so I was like, I just like don't care that much about you because it looks like you just are very physically attracted to each other. And that's kind of it, apart from that you have continued to think about each other since. Like, that's the only like emotion I'm getting out of you. So I was just like, like I just can't bring myself to really care that much about you, you know? But like I said, I still recommend it. I still think it's good. And there were parts of it that I really enjoyed. Even just the discussion around flowers. I don't know why, but I found that fascinating. Like, when they were talking about specific installations and arbors and like the types of flowers they could get and describing all the different flowers and what they mean in the language of flowers. Like, I loved those discussions and those parts of the book. But the actual romance, like, I didn't care about. If you guys know any other books that have a lot of focus around flowers, please let me know. I also recently read The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart by Holly Ringland, I think that's right. And that discusses a lot about like the symbolism of flowers, the language of flowers, all the different things about flowers, specifically Australian native flowers, and I loved that book. So if you guys have any flower book recommendations, please let me know, because apparently it's something that I really enjoy reading about. I also finally read Slow Days, Fast Company by Eve Babbitt. This is biographical fiction, I think technically, which basically means that Eve Babbitt wrote about her life in a slightly exaggerated or dramatized way, or like some things might not be true, but you don't actually know which things are true and which things aren't, which is just like a really interesting concept as a whole. But I've been wanting to read an Eve Babbitt's book for probably around a year now. If you don't know who Eve Babbitt was, she was like the it girl of like, I think the 60s and 70s. Yeah. So she went to a lot of parties and just like had a lot of connections with really famous people. And I really love reading books about like old Hollywood glamour and just famous people and like the behind the scenes of that. I just find it really fascinating. Don't really know why. I feel like I was introduced to that kind of world and idea through The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I've just been chasing that feeling ever since. I've read a few books that kind of give that vibe, like City of Girls, but if you guys have more recommendations of books that just like give that old Hollywood behind the scenes drama kind of vibe, let me know. I don't think this book gave me exactly what I was looking for, but I did enjoy it. This is kind of like a series of essays that she's written about all the different guys that she's seen and different kind of parties that she's gone to and like connections that she's had. And it was interesting and it was good, and she writes in a really funny way. Like she has this really subtle but clever humor that can be seen through her writing, which I really enjoyed. But as a whole, I wasn't like obsessed. I think I thought I was going to be really obsessed, but I wasn't really that obsessed. But I don't think I'm going to give this book a rating, because it still is kind of a bit of a memoir, like, you know, it's actual stories about her life, so I don't really want to give it a rating, but I do recommend it if it sounds interesting to you. It's also really, really short, so a very easy read. Then we have Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. All of the last couple books that I'm going to mention are also featured in a reading vlog, so I'll link that reading vlog down below if you want to get like more in-depth thoughts and just like my whole reading experience. But I loved this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. This is Ali Hazelwood's first YA romance. All of the other ones she's written so far have been adult, and I've just got to say I hope she writes more young adult in the future, because I think she did a phenomenal job. As someone who does not care about chess in the slightest, I loved this book. I don't care about chess, but I do care about Mallory and Nolan. I do. They made me care about chess. They made me so interested in the tournaments and the strategies and all of the things that go along with it. The storyline of this book is basically we're following Mallory, who just graduated from high school. She's from a pretty difficult home situation, and she is kind of like the main provider for her family, and she's working as a mechanic, but then she loses that job and she is forced to take this position that she really didn't want to have to take, but now has to because she just needs to bring income into her family. And it is basically like a chess internship where she just like plays chess for a year and like studies chess. It's actually really interesting, and chess is a pretty touchy subject for her. It's something that she used to really love, but because of something kind of traumatic, chess has become kind of like a triggering situation and topic for her. So she quit chess, hasn't played it for years, and now is kind of like forced to for this internship. So you're following her along with that. Obviously there is a romance, but it's also just like a really beautiful story about Mallory and her character development. But as much as I did love the romance, I think I just loved Mallory's storyline the most. Like just watching her character development and her just become who she became by the end of the book. I just really enjoyed it. Then we have The 7-Year Slip, which was another 4.5 star read for me. This was so good. We had quite a few great books this month. I do think that if the whole book felt like the second half of this book, it would have been like a 5-star read for me. But the first half, I was just like not super into it. I didn't dislike it at all, but it was just like, yeah, this is like interesting. This is good. It feels like a 4-star read. And then the second half, I was like, this is literally fantastic. And it really hit me in the feels. I did tear up at one point. I feel like there were so many quotes that I underlined and so many things that were said that I was just like, wow, this is just really hitting me in the heart right now. But in this story, we're following Clementine, and her aunt, who she was really, really close to, just passed away about 6 months ago and has left her apartment to Clementine. And her aunt always said that the apartment was magic, and Clementine never believed her until one day Clementine is just, you know, living in this apartment that is now hers, and she comes home and there is a man in this apartment. And not only that, but she realized that she has jumped 7 years back into the the past, and that is like where this man is from. He is from the past, and it's just, it's really hard to explain. I feel like that sounds very confusing. It makes a lot more sense when you're reading it. I feel like me explaining it, I'm like, this is not sounding as good as it did when I actually read it. I feel like they spend a lot of time explaining that whole situation, so it's not confusing, I promise. But honestly, that put me off for a long time because I was like, I don't really want to read about a time jumping romance. Like, that doesn't sound good to me at all. But then I just saw so many amazing reviews about it, and so obviously I picked it up, and I'm so glad that I did because I really fell in love with this story, and specifically with Clementine, just like her storyline. It talks a lot about grief and just like figuring out who you are and what you want to do with your life. Like, there was a real strong fiction element to this. Like, yes, obviously there was a romance, and the romance was very significant, but I feel like Clementine's storyline was just as important as the romance, and I love books like that. I love it when the romance is significant, but there's still a lot more going on. Like, it's so much deeper than that, and that's what this book felt like. And then lastly, we have Five Survive by Holly Jackson, and honestly, this was just a good time. It definitely had me on the edge of my seat. It definitely had me like wanting to continue reading. I think I read this in like 24 hours. I read the first like 200 pages in one day, and then I woke up the next day and just like binged the whole rest of the book that morning because I was like, I just need to know what's going to happen. But in this book, we follow 6 friends who are going to spring break, and they're in this like RV doing a bit of like a road trip situation, and then they have some issues with the RV, so they pull off kind of in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly there is a sniper who is threatening to kill them unless they reveal a specific secret that the sniper is looking for. And so this whole book takes place over 10 hours, I think, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And you're just following them hour by hour as they try to work out like how they get out of this situation, or like what the secret is that this sniper is looking for. And obviously only 5 survive. I feel like I read a lot of mysteries, but not a lot of thrillers, and this felt like a thriller to me. Like, it definitely had me thrilled. Like, I was kind of stressed the whole time, but I definitely enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it. I think I gave it like 4 stars because it wasn't like one of those books where I'm like, oh my gosh, I like can't believe it, it was so amazing, but I did have a lot of fun. But those are all the books that I have to talk about today. I feel like I've been talking for like 3 hours. Hopefully you guys got some new recommendations from this video, and as per usual, I'm always looking for new recommendations, so leave me a comment down below letting me know what I should read in November. But I love you guys so much. I hope you had a great reading month. Also, let me know what your favorite book was from November, or your least favorite. That's kind of fun. But I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Goodbye.